All right, this is the round-off rule. This round-off rule you can use throughout the entire year. This is how we round our answers, because a lot of times it's not specific, especially in the book. On tests, we will define to you what you should round to, but in problems for book problems and some worksheets we do and things throughout the year, it doesn't specify rounding. This is the rule should be following. And on tests, when we tell you what to round to, usually we're following this rule right here. Okay, so the rule is, looking at this number, first of all, you need to know your places. So you have hundreds, tens, ones, or units, depending on who you look at. Then you have the first decimal place, that is the tenths. Second decimal place is the hundredths. Then third is the the thousandths. Then the fourth is the 10,000ths. There's the 10 part. And then the fifth decimal place here is the 100,000ths. Okay, so when we talk about places, we're going to use these names. Round to the 10th place, round to the 100th place. You need to know that the 10th place is 1 decimal. The 10,000th place is 4 decimals. The 1,000th place is 3 decimals. Okay, so you got to understand that. So the rule is round up 5 or higher. Hopefully you know this rounding rule. Round down 4 or lower. Okay, so when we round, this is basic rounding here. This is not different from when you first learned rounding. When we round, we look at the next decimal place. So if I'm rounding to the tenths, I'm going to look at the hundredths, the next one. So if I'm looking at the rounding at the tenths, I'm looking at the hundredths place. So that's a 7. That means I need to round up 189.6. because hundredths is 5 or higher. If I'm rounding to the tens place, I look at the ones. That is 9 is 5 or higher, so that's 190. Looking round to the ones place, 5 or higher, so I'm looking at the tenths. That's the next place behind it. So looking at the tenths, that number is 5 or higher, so I would round up again. So notice all of these I ended up rounding up. That won't be true always. So I have round up. Remember, when you're rounding up, this is where a lot of people have trouble. What is after 9? 10. So a lot of people put it with 0 there. But you got to remember that we're looking at the number 189. If I'm rounding up from 189, I get 190. So I end up rounding tens or ones, I end up the same. Okay, that does happen every once in a while. So our rule that we're going to follow, round off rule, the answer should have 1 more decimal than the data. So the data is the numbers you start with, the numbers you're working with. Okay, so we need 1 more decimal than the data. Okay, so what that means is, here's my data, example 1, find the average. Here's my data. I have 1 decimal, 2 decimals, 1 decimal, 2 decimals. Whichever number has the highest number of decimals, we go 1 more than it. So in this case, we have 2 numbers that have 2 decimals. So my answer needs 3 decimals. Okay, so we need to find the average. It's asking us to find the average. That's what we're going to do. Hopefully you know to find the average, we add them up, divide by how many there are. So you'd use a calculator for this. So I'm going to add all these up first. Then I'm going to divide by 4, because that's how many there are. So I get, when I add them up, 47.06 divided by 4. Type that in. Whatever answer you get, you need to round to the 3rd decimal place, round to the thousandths. In this case, it's exact, so I didn't really have to round because it's exactly 3 decimals already. Okay, next one. We have our data here, 1 decimal, 0 decimal, 0 decimal. So find the one with the most decimals, which is 1 in this case. I need 2 decimals in my answer. So that means I'm going to round to the hundredths place. That is 2 decimals. So now I got to add them up. Divide by 3. So that is 40.1 divided by 3. This one, you'll notice, I'll write it out, 13.3666667 is what your calculator probably says. Okay, so we need to round to 2 decimal places. That means I'm looking at the third. That tells me whether I round up or down. This is 5 or higher, so I need to round up. So it's 13.37. That's my answer. Okay, next one. 2 decimals, 2 decimals, 1 decimal. So I'm going to have 3 decimals in the answer here. Once the average once again. Okay, so I add them up, then press enter, then divide by the number, and you should get 11.46667 on your calculator. So 3 decimals, that means I look at, so that's rounding to the thousandths. I look at the next one, so that's the 4th decimal. Once again, that happens to be 5 or higher, so I'm going to round up. Please remember they do not always round up. If it's 4 or lower in that place you're looking at, round down. Okay. And there you have it. That is the round off rule. 1 more decimal than the data. Using normal rounding rules, 5 or higher, round up, 4 or lower, round down. Remember, we look at the next decimal place. Okay, so you guys need to fill out your summary. All right, this is Unit 1, Objective 1. So this is the first objective in your book. It is, what is statistics? So there's just a few vocab terms relating to the word statistics that we're going to go through. Okay, so the first word is statistics. That's the name of the class. Obviously, this is going to be a very important word. And I want to clarify something. A lot of people think this is just a normal math class, but this first definition is going to tell you the science of collecting, describing, and interpreting data. That is statistics. Notice it has the word science in it. This is not a typical math class. There is going to be vocabulary, there's going to be definitions. You'll see that this first chapter is almost all vocabulary. We're actually done with the math part. The math part is a round-off rule and sigma notation. Everything from now on is vocab. Okay, so you'll be wanting to make flashcards. You'll be wanting to make or write out definitions for every chapter. So keep that in mind. It's not just math. There's a lot of vocab because this is a science, right? We're describing, we're interpreting, we're collecting data. We're going out and doing something, experiments with this data. Okay, so there is a lot of scientific method involved here. But instead of calling it scientific method, because it is slightly different, it is a little more mathy, a little less science-y, I guess, they have their own method, which is called the statistical method. Okay, so there's 3 steps of the statistical method. First is carefully defining the situation. What are you looking for? Okay, be very specific with it. And you'll see in our problems, they're very specific with their details to what is happening when we talk about problems, or word problems, I guess. Then we go out and gather the data. So we got to get the information. We got to go out, conduct the experiment, get our data. Then we need to summarize the data. Okay, so we got to make it concise. Usually this consists of using something like mean, median, mode, standard deviation, variance, lots of words that we'll talk about a lot throughout the year, but words that you probably heard before. We're summarizing the data using those methods. And then we are going to deliver and communicate conclusions. This is more, that 4th step is more the 2nd semester. We're going to talk about z-scores and t-scores and chi-square scores, and we're going to talk about what they mean for the context in which we're going through. So notice there is writing you're going to do. There's sentences you're going to write out. There's explanations you're going to write out. There's vocab you're going to look at. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff to be dealing with. Statistics can be broken down, so you can kind of see the statistical method. That we can break down into two subgroups. We have descriptive statistics, collection, presentation, and description of sample data. So this is where we get, basically it's the first three things on our statistical method. We get the situation, we get the data, we summarize the data. That is called descriptive. Okay, so all it is taking the data and looking at it. That's descriptive. What is the situation we're looking at? A lot of stats in sports and things like that, these are descriptive statistics, right? They're looking at a player, a game, whatever it is, and they're describing what happened through numbers. Okay. In the other type, inferential statistics. Okay. So this is step 4. This is delivering and communicating conclusions, basically. So we are interpreting values from descriptive statistics and drawing conclusions for the entire population. Okay. So this is where we take the data we get and say, okay, this is what our sample showed. We took some data, we got it. This is what we show. This is what we think will always happen. That's the inferential. What is going to happen in the future based on this data? Going back to my sports analogy, right? We take the data from a certain player, maybe, right? They take a look at a player, they get some data from their games they've played, okay? Then they use that data to infer what happens in the future, okay? If they're trying to trade for a player, a certain player in whatever sport we're talking about, right? They're going to look at the data that happened before and look, will this player be good for our team in the future, right? That'd be the inferential part, okay? So that's two more. I'll highlight these. Two more things you need to know: descriptive statistics and inferential statistics, okay? We're spending most of the year in probability and inferential statistics, meaning the collection and presentation of sample data generally is going to be done for us. Okay, the book's going to say, here's your data. They'll describe the situation for you, right? Here, this is what the data is about, and here is the data. What does it mean? So we're going to go into inferential. What does that mean for the population? Okay, so that is all of 1.1. Make sure you do your summary. This one, you're just kind of talking about what are 3 sentences on what those 3 words and the statistical method, basically. Okay, it's pretty simple.